Well, I was thinking prior to this, I was like, this must be like blind dating for you, these people, and you never know who you're going to run into, and it's
Yeah,
obviously know who to see on the screen, and then you're like, oh, who's it going to be?
that's exactly right. And well, except there's no kissing and no romance, so
Yep, yeah,
that takes some of the pressure off.
there you go.
But as a pastor too, you do this kind of thing because people visit your church, and then it's a small enough church so that I always greet the visitors and find out a little bit about them, and so it's not that big of a stretch for me. So I am recording this. Is that okay? If you
Yep.
don't want it recorded, I cannot record. Okay.
Nope, yeah, that's fine.
And then after, we'll see what we want to do. Well, Ryan, why don't you tell me a little bit about yourself? Because obviously you know a little bit about me, but I don't know anything about you.
Yep. So I work as a drafter currently. So I guess I go back and kind of compass that in with my story of faith also, that I was brought up Catholic. And when my parents got divorced, I pretty much just went to church with my mom, and I was more like a, dragging along kind of thing. So it was more of a, I don't know, more of a thing I didn't want to do. Graduated high school, went to college for a couple of years, wasn't too into my faith, would go to church every now and then. And then kind of what spurred like a renewal was I moved in with my grandparents for a summer. I was going to be like a self-taught man, Renaissance man. I was done with college, and I was like, oh, if I just read the textbooks, I'll, that's easy enough. And after a summer of that, and
if
that
you
was
just read the textbooks.
Yep. So after a summer of that, it was like, okay, you either got to go back to school or get a job, and ended up going back to school. But while I was up there, I just got like had continuity of going to mass every Sunday. EWTN morning mass on the TV in the morning. Got involved in a young adult group, which kind of built up a decent foundation. I also read some books that kind of sparked, searching for truth. One was Peace Pilgrim, Her Life and Works, and then the other one was The Dialogues of Plato. I think it was more like The Dialogues of Plato that kind of caught with me.
Really? Interesting.
And then, the Peace Pilgrim was more of like a curiosity of her faith. Like, this woman just had this really strong faith and went through all these obstacles throughout her travels that struck a chord with me. And then I guess from there, I've always kind of been a bit of a YouTube addict, but moved back to my hometown, from Wisconsin. Did mention that, live in Eau Claire right now. And still kind of kept it, but kind of faltered in my faith. But then I started seeing, I guess, benefits of going to church, where, like throughout a weekly basis of just like, oh, I seem to be more, I guess, in control or more, centered. So that kind of kept me going back. And then the next step from there was I got involved with some youth ministry at a church in town. And that's kind of been the next stepping stone where I'm currently at, where I'm learning more about the ins and outs of the faith, and then trying to, which is something maybe we can get into during our conversation, is integrating what I'm learning through Jordan Peterson, you, John Vervaeke, and that was like a whole thing for me too, of getting me back into the church, and piqued my interest. And trying to translate, the lesson plans that I have for the confirmation kids into the language I'm starting to pick up, to see if that catches their attention the way it did with me.
It's a good, you'll learn a lot working with kids, especially if, working towards confirmation or something like that, because you begin to recognize the conceptualization, the gap in conceptualizations. And so, well, if you have to reach over to them, that's going to force you to do translating. And, again, a lot of the Jordan Peterson, Vervaeke, a lot of this is working through language issues, because the culture and assumptions, it just continues to migrate. And so even a gap of 10 or 20 years between a generation can be a huge gap in terms of just conceptualization. What are we talking about in church? What's going on here? So that's a good thing to that's a good thing to do.
Yeah. Yeah. The current one is the Foundations of Discipleship. So like the supplied text starts with, like having the kids imagine they're a fisherman and Jesus is coming to, cast aside your nets and follow me. And I'm like, well, these kids aren't fishermen, they're not even working yet. How do I get this, translate that message into something that's a little more substantial for them. Although I'm afraid I might be going like over their heads with some of the Vervaeke stuff. I've pretty much lost it with the cognitive science stuff. So I'm going back to the old like philosophy to try and I've been going through, I think, like episodes 16 to 18 for this one, because that's when he starts getting into Jesus, Christianity, and then the Gnosticism.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to, so they basically have the three foundations of spending time with him in prayer, getting to know his teachings, and then that leads to ultimately loving and worshiping him. And I think it's in 16 where he talks about the altered states of consciousness to a higher state of consciousness, and then like transforming all that. So it's like, okay, well, what is prayer? Is that getting us into the altered state? So then we're like in communion, and then also reading the scriptures, and also going to church, the sacraments, the community is building our worldview, our frame. So how to mesh all that together. And I don't know. Have you had much experience like where, like I find this stuff super fascinating, but do general people like to hear it like that, or they prefer the
Vervaeke's basically establishing a new vocabulary, and so much of my work is trying to take ideas and fit it to use another people's existent category. So, Jordan Peterson, because he uses much more of a mythological frame, I found much easier to appropriate for my work than Vervaeke. Vervaeke stuff is, I learn a ton, and I can, to the degree that I can use some of the vocabulary he's using and the insights I'm gaining from it, but that stuff usually doesn't get too close to the people I'm working with, because just to figure out what John is doing the whole time, you just have to spend a lot of time figuring out what's he saying with these words,
Yeah.
So
big words.
Yeah, big words. But that's Vervaeke is basically doing an academic, he's trying to popularize it a little bit, but his frame of reference is very academic and
very technical.
So you got to do the translating yourself. So yeah, no, I don't, a lot of Vervaeke stuff, it's in my head, but the way he puts it out there isn't too applicable to most of the kind of work I have to do.
Because for me to tell like these kids that that prayer is like the us transcending, or like opening our minds to try and reframe problems, or like I think they understand the worldview type of thing. I think that's kind of a basic thing. But then I'm like stuck on I came across a quote off a comment off of a video about Bonhoeffer, or what the call to discipleship, or whatever it's. This woman had mentioned, how does she phrase it? Authentic transformation, actualized faith. So like, which Vervaeke is kind of going through in a technical aspect. So I'm trying to combine the practices of, how do we, which I don't know, it gets tricky, because then I was like, well, now am I like preaching Gnosticism, where it's like, okay, we have to keep transcending up these levels and, actualize agape, which I guess we're trying to do, and how to define agape so these kids understand it. But.
Well, and I think that's, so how do, I don't think they need to so much have a definition of agape is just more, I think it's more important that they learn to notice it when it's around them. And in fact, agape is around, just a Sunday, every time a new mother has to get up out of bed to take care of a newborn, there's
Sorry, I got someone poking
No, that's
into the
okay.
office.
So you have this self-donating, self-giving love. And Vervaeke, I thought, that was one of his best lessons, talked about how this kind of love develops and creates persons out of others just by, at some point the child receives all this love, and the child might get into a position when the child in a small way has to also do what it's seen the parent do. And so that's where I think Girard's mimetic desire is sort of inverted into the child learns love by being loved. And my wife teaches at a Waldorf school, and so she goes all the way up to 8th grade, and then she had to go back all the way back down to 1st grade, and she comes home just exhausted, not because the material is so hard, but because the children are so young and you have to pour so much into them out of very basic things. And it's just so much love that you pour into these kids all the time, and that they just sort of build up as they go. So yeah, I think that to me, the Vervaeke stuff is helpful. Well, part of the difficulty is that he's basically saying these established, not just Christian, but these established Christian practices can no longer be, legitimately employed and deployed. And that's obviously something where, say, Jonathan Peugeot and I disagree with him. And he knows that. He's very upfront with that, because what I see him doing is sort of looking at the Christian faith and translating it into a lot of this technical language so that it's sort of out there in the general, you can see it within sort of general revelation, and then saying, okay, if this is what these religions afford it, can we establish sort of a new religion that affords this without some of the areas that he sees as being problematic of historical religions? Now, I don't find those other areas as problematic, so I don't see the need for his general program. But in listening to him, I can sort of view and say, these are a whole bunch of things that I was embedded in and practicing. And now from a cognitive science point of view, I have a little better understanding of why this stuff works in us and how this stuff works in us in terms of life under the sun. And so that's really where I see the benefit of his project for me. I've said this in a number of videos, and I'm dubious. I'm very doubtful that he can achieve his project, because it's similar to Jordan Peterson saying, you can't write a fairy tale. And the reason you can't write a fairy tale isn't so much that you're not smart or you can't write a good story. It's that there's just simply not enough time. Religions take, many, many generations and thousands of years to sort of accumulate and develop the wisdom and the practices, and this then grows in a communal way. It's very, very difficult. If let's say John establishes some new thing, that would actually be helpful and beneficial. If it lives 100 years, that would be extremely unusual. If it lives longer than 100 years, that would be extraordinarily unusual. Because when you look at, say, founders of world religions, there aren't that many of them. And there were significant contributors all along the way. And so, it's an audacious project, but again, given the opportunity to sort of overhear looking at learning something about cognitive science and then turning around and seeing what in the church we've practiced for generations, we can say, oh, wow, look at what we've been doing. We didn't know, we weren't using that language, but we can appreciate the benefits that these practices and beliefs have afforded over a great amount of time. So that's sort of how I locate Vervaeke's project.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think what I would like to do is take that technical knowledge that Vervaeke, like you're talking about, where, okay, we've been doing this for so long. Now we kind of understand it in a more technical aspect. And then, I mean, to combine that within the church to just make it a more, I guess, efficient practice, or to, like, help smooth things along.
Well,
If
I don't,
that would be,
yeah, I don't know if necessarily, I look at it more in terms of these are the practices of the church. Now I have a little better understanding of why the practices have developed as they have. I'm less of a reformer in that way, that I'm looking necessarily to change a lot of the practices. But I think his language is helpful, perhaps, to explain to secularized people, here is a different view of what's going on with this practice, and this is why we know it has benefits. But I don't know. See, again, part of it is just the disagreement in terms of a metaphysical foundation between myself and John Vervaeke. I don't know necessarily that the practice needs to be overhauled, as perhaps better understood in a secular frame as to even simply some of the benefits of it. So that's kind of how I see it.
okay. Yeah. Yeah, sorry, I've kind of got like a jumbled mess of notes here. So if you had anything off the
That's
top of your
fine.
head,
Go for it. It's your time. You're one of the you got a slot, and I know sometimes I get emails from people. Oh, I can't get a slot. It's like, man, something will open up. Just be patient. And
right? Yeah, I was surprised. I think I started looking back in August, and I was kind of like checking it daily for a while, and then I was just like, all right, well, whatever. And then randomly checked it one day, and I was like, well, what is this? This must be a fluke. But
well, what I do is I just look about a month ahead on my calendar, and I see, okay, I've got these weeks, we're going to be real busy. This week looks like so then I just open up slots sort of randomly. And so they're just bound to just pop up out of nowhere, seemingly, with not necessarily a lot of notice. And, people check intently just like you, and it's like, I never find a slot, and then they give up. And sometimes like, wow, whatever, there's a slot, boom, and there's a slot. So sometimes they stay open for a few days, which is sort of cool. So it's,
oh wow, yeah.
I don't want to have a situation where, you have to support me at $100 a month to talk to me for an hour or something like that. I just find that kind of distasteful, and maybe at some point. So I always want to at least have some slots that people can just, I have to regulate it in somehow, but because I only have so much time. So
Right.
That's the best system I have so far.
Win the lottery, I guess.
That's right. It's kind of a lottery pick. That's exactly what it is.
Yeah.
If you're really determined, if you build a structure where you check it every day, you'll have a much higher opportunity. But sometimes it'll be like, oh, there's a slot, grab it.
Yep. Yeah. You haven't had that retreat yet, have you? The one that's out on the East Coast?
That's coming up this weekend.
This week. Okay.
Yeah. And I'm thinking about, I think once we get everyone in the room, and once we kind of go around the circle and get to know each other a little bit, and then find out, okay, what do you want to do with this time? And then I'll kind of structure the rest of the time and figure out. I always do that with the meetups. What do the people in the room want? Because they're the ones. And then I can usually, if they want something from me or a different perspective, I can put things together pretty quickly. So should be interesting.
Yeah.
It's going to be cold, though, and you'll see. My brother-in-law, I hope he chopped enough wood. He's got all these wood-burning stoves, so
that'll be nice and toasty then. Those wood stoves put off a lot of heat.
Yeah, it'll be sort of like being back in the 18th century in some ways. It's an old farmhouse, so should be interesting.
Oh. So one thing I had on here, this was from episode 17, where he was talking about John was talking about how he was reading Spinoza, and then he started to see the world Spinozistically, I guess, or like through, through the way Spinoza may have seen the world to come to his set of beliefs. And I was wondering, like, what what would that look like for a Christian? So that's, I mean, you have, and that kind of gets into his, where he talks about, so we have these sets of beliefs, and I think that's also what I'm trying to get for this transformation aspect, is turning those sets of beliefs so that they actually change our being. And I get, if that's going to the sacraments, if that has to do with like the worldview stuff, and then how to, if there's like a framing problem or how we reframe that in a religious context. But
well, I think one of the, Vervaeke's talking about propositional knowledge, then the perspectival, participatory, and procedural, and I think in many ways, I think the propositional type knowledge is very useful because it's the way in which we can kind of communicate with each other and can have a group. I'll say, okay, this is what we believe, these propositional truths, but I don't know that particular way of knowing is as powerful in terms of how it transforms us as the perspectival and the participatory and the procedural. Because and I think to the degree that the propositional sort of begins to shape the others is the way we're changed by it. And that's sort of the point of Jonathan Haidt's Elephant and the Rider, in that the rider is very propositional, but the elephant is very procedural and participatory and perspectival. And so the things that the rider hears somehow has to get all the way down into the elephant, and that usually happens in community and over time, and
also through like ritual and practice.
Exactly, because
Okay.
ritual and practice, the elephant understands, and you can see this if you train a dog or a cat or an animal, that it's repetition, it's reward and punishment. That's how you train something that isn't capable of doing highly propositional work. And so then if you can figure out the interface between the propositional and the other 3 P's, then you can actually gain some success in terms of having a community formed around these beliefs. And the church has actually been doing this for a very long time.
But they don't, so, and that's, I guess what I'm trying to do is say that explicitly, or I don't know if explicitly is the right word, but pull the curtain behind the machine and let, that's the view I want to bring to them, because I guess that's the view that I am now learning about and is hitting home with me. But I guess not everyone operates that way, I suppose, but I guess that's the goal I'm trying to accomplish.
Well, the Roman Catholic Church has actually been very successful at this sort of thing for a very long time, because part of what happened in Protestantism is that the propositional the propositional came rather late in, keeps coming late in the game. It's after we're knowing with the other 3 P's quite a bit that, and I don't know if you're following many Mary Cohen's videos. She's doing videos on Ratzinger's book, and I'd had a number of conversations with her. Now she started her own YouTube channel. She had a real nice video on, the propositional. It's kind of out there. So the reason to put it out there is that now we can sort of see it a little distance from ourselves, and we kind of figured that out in kind of a Petersonian way after watching each other for so long. And once it's out there, now we can kind of do something with it, but then to make that jump back to the other way. But Roman Catholics have been doing this for years and years and years and years. And really sort of what the Protestant Reformation did to the Roman Catholic Church, obviously the Council of Trent and some of that history, but what it did to the Roman Catholic Church is force it again to level up on some of this propositional stuff. And that's, because of the Council of Trent, there was significant reform in the Roman Catholic Church, especially with respect to the corruption, which was a big motivator of the Protestant Reformation. So So I think what, where some of Vervaeke's stuff is helpful is that you can say, oh, this is what we've been doing and this is why we do it. And that's, I think, a good hedge against the modernistic tendency to look at this old stuff and say, oh, why are we doing this still? We don't even know why we do this old stuff anymore. We should just stop doing this stuff. And we're at the point now of saying, we didn't know why we did this old stuff, but it was really important. And now with respect to some cognitive science, we can appreciate the value of what we were doing and the significant contribution it made to the overall life of the community and life of the church. Whereas what happened sort of in modernism is everything went highly propositional. And then we said, well, all these practices, we don't really need to do that. We'll just think propositionally. But then the rider and the elephant sort of get disconnected.
Yeah. So I guess that would be, trying to communicate the reasons why we do those things. I guess so. Because so John and like Brett Weinstein are trying to. So that you're saying they're more on the propositional side, where they're still trying to keep, they want the practices, but they want to change some of the language. They almost want to have another council or something to.
I think sort of what
happened.
So I think it's helpful to understand secularism as sort of late stage Protestantism. Okay. And so what Brett Weinstein and John Vervaeke do is sort of having come through, I don't think Brett is terribly reflective on any of this stuff, not anywhere near as much as John is. So I think what John is in a sense doing, so John's personal story gets into this because he was raised a Christian and for a variety of reasons distanced himself from it and discovered some other things in some Eastern practice, but is still a physicalist. And so he's trying to, in a sense, have more of a secular, develop a set of secular practices which can be done communally, which will afford the benefits that traditional religions have afforded without some of what he sees as liabilities in terms of some of their worldview issues. So that's generally his program. And let's see, where was I going with this? What was your question again about Vervaeke and Weinstein, or your supposition?
I think that they were basically trying to take those practices. They basically want to trim some fat off of biblical teachings, I guess, or like the Bible or the canon.
Yeah, they'd like, well,
or what they consider fat as.
They'd like to relocate it as such, and that's partly an issue of pluralism as well in terms of in terms of the West. But so what happens in secularization is that you imagine that the mythos gets relocated. And this is, again, a sort of a difference between Peterson and them, because Peterson wants to very much keep the mythos and the mythology as a very active element, whereas the propositional.
That's where Peterson gets into, you can list all that stuff, but it doesn't have an effect on us. Whereas once you put it in a story, that's almost like a shortcut to the elephant.
Oh, that's exactly right.
Yeah.
That's the elephant's operating. That's in some ways the machine. That's the nexus between the elephant and the rider, which is narrative and mythos. Because the elephant understands narrative, because the elephant just lives narrative. And all this propositional stuff, well, that's just kind of floating up here for the elephant, and the rider can intersect with that. So John Vervaeke would very much like to get beyond the merely propositional and get back, and establish practices and institutions and wisdom communities The difficulty that I think he has is in some ways the rider and the elephant problem too, because you can talk about this stuff all day long in propositional language, and you're still mostly talking to the writer. And that's why John is very much into his playing, his Tai Chi and the martial arts and the work that he's doing, because that's very much elephant training. But you've got to figure out how to get all of these pieces working together, the mythos, the narrative element of it, informed by the propositional, embedded in practice. And again, because of the organic ways in which religions develop over long periods of time, all of these things tend to come together quite organically in a religion. So if you're going to try and sort of take things out of it, avoiding what you imagine to be problematic, it's a tremendously difficult project to say, okay, we're going to put this together. Partly because, and I think this is the foundational defect of secularism, in that you have to sort of have a barrier of skepticism between ourselves and the stars, as it were, that which is out there. And that means that, okay, so I'm finding these practices helpful, and I'm finding these practices meaningful. They give me the experience of meaning. And so you work hard on not bullshitting yourself in terms of all of these other things that he talks about. But at some point, it has to connect up to the most real. And again, all of religions sort of do that because they have claims about the most real, and it's part of the package. And so at some point, metaphysics has to be engaged. And you can't keep it just in terms of this seems to work for us. I mean, because you really are attempting to construct an entire world in which you inhabit. And so it's a tremendously ambitious project.
So do you think I have a better, not me personally, but I guess what I'm trying to do is kind of like do that, but within the existing Christian framework? Where it's
yeah, you have a lot less to do.
Yeah, because it's more of like a plug-in from like, like a software aspect where it's like, okay, I just want to, get you involved in more of these practices that are going to help, like, I guess I'm trying to make it more efficient or streamlined, where it's like, okay, if you pray, you're going to build your framework faster. You're going to have, you're going to build that. I don't even know if this is the right way to put it, but that altered state of consciousness, if that's altered state of consciousness, that's what praying could be considered. Like if you, and like, oh, you got the monks on the MRI machine, and you're like rewiring your brain. So it's like a very practical aspect of, I guess, growing in religion, I guess, or growing in the, yeah.
I don't know that it necessarily makes it more efficient, but I think what it does is helps you see, because for generations practiced it in a sense innocently, and I say in a sort of naively. I don't mean that in the pejorative sense, but naively with respect to scientific ideas. And so what happened in the 19th and 20th century was there was so much scientific dismissal of religion that religious people sort of took on a communal inferiority complex in some ways. And what some of the Vervaeke stuff says is, no, actually there's a ton of wisdom in all of these practices. And I see his work as affording me really a fair amount of apologetic tools, because I can see the credibility of ancient Christian practices within a framework of cognitive science. Now he's then got the further challenge of saying, I'm going to take this and I'm going to create something out of it in which people can inhabit. That's a tremendously ambitious project that you don't have to do, because you inherit a metaphysics. And in a sense, what you're doing is simply adding a little something on and adding new perspectives on a huge body of received wisdom and institution and all of that. So it's that way. I think it's, it affords you something without the challenge of having to build everything.
Hmm. Yeah. What do you suppose? I guess I was, because the thought occurred to me, like, am I like trying to Scientologize Roman Catholicism, in the sense, like, I came across some videos where it was like Scientology, this like video of like it's like almost, well, it's very propositional and very therapeutic, in the sense of like, oh, do these things to be a better person, or like, they're like, it's like a video of like walking you through like someone's perspective of like saying like, oh, this person's being very confrontational with me, maybe I need to consider that they're having a bad day and they're under a lot of emotional stress, so I shouldn't respond with anger. And
well, Scientology is part scam, part self-help. So
yeah, well, I guess what my question is, why hasn't, well, at least my experience, I've never had a spiritual director, but maybe that's where they would come into play, of like combining religion and therapy and like a lot of those type of practices.
yeah, and a lot of Christian therapists in the Protestant world, a guy like Larry Crabb, um, the guys who wrote the Boundaries book. I mean, there's been a lot of this. Well, no, there's been plenty in the Roman Catholic world too. I'm just less familiar with the Roman Catholic world because there's a sense of siloing between Protestants and Catholics in some of this stuff. But
Well,
others
I
have
guess
done it.
that's specifically Roman Catholic, but like implementing that kind of aspect into the practices of,
Oh
I don't know,
yeah,
because I mean, I guess
it's out there.
from
Many people
okay,
have been working on things like this. It's out
okay.
there. And yeah, if you went to a spiritual director, now spiritual directors come at this in all kinds of different ways, and so their background, it will shape their approach. But no, it's very much pastoral care, spiritual direction. Many have attempted to integrate what we learn to have it enhance the wisdom traditions and a lot of the wisdom that has been carried forward in the institution.
Yeah. Yeah. So what kind of stuff are you working on right now? What's on the forefront of your interests?
Well, I've been interested in the Kanye phenomenon, partly because of my experience in the Black community. I've been thinking a lot about, so my last few videos I've used a fair amount of Tom Holland, and so now I'm working through Tom Holland's books, a bunch of his different books, and so in a sense, part of his thesis is that secularism and Christianity have sort of made their way through together. And many people, even the new atheists that, Jordan Peterson says, well, you're really sort of a Christian. And of course, Dillahunty and Sam Harris recoil in horror and outrage that Jordan Peterson would make such a statement. But Tom Holland basically historically comes around and says, no, that's pretty much right, that Christianity has so deeply impacted the Western world, and via colonialism and just the power of the Western world, this has deeply impacted the rest of the world. And so these values disconnected from the mythos. Okay, so the values disconnected from the mythos, even amongst deeply secular people, have been shaped and molded by Christianity. Okay, so if we look at that and we say, okay, so it's we can sort of call Sam Harris and Matt Dillahunty Christians of a sort, or at least deeply impacted by Christians. So what actually is a Christian? And that's when you get into some of the propositional truth. It's people say, well, I profess these things, or maybe some of the procedural truth. I do these things. These are my practices. Some of the participatory or perspectival truth. Well, I trust in Jesus. I trust in God, I believe in God. And so what you have actually, and I think Vervaeke's stuff is helpful with this, what we have actually is we see that this question of identity, of Christian identity, is actually quite multifaceted. And an atheist, a new atheist like Sam Harris, maybe has deeply embedded within his worldview deeply Christian values, but it's disconnected from a whole bunch of other things. Then you have other people who, have very different mixes. So at that point, then we can begin to ask ourselves, well, especially as a Christian with a missiological bent like myself, okay, so what should be my approach to people out there? And one of the interesting things is that over the last 50 years, the context has changed dramatically. It used to be, well, America is a very large and diverse place. So let's say if you were in certain areas of Wisconsin, some communities might be deeply Roman Catholic, like some of the communities where I grew up in New Jersey. The Italian communities were deeply Roman Catholic, and the Irish communities. So the Dutch were deeply Reformed. And so, okay, so we've got these, and then people sort of leave those communities and become secular. I'm trying to figure out a framework for thinking through these and describing them and talking about them. And part of, why Kanye is interesting for me in this is that what he's doing, I've been around the Black church long enough to know that a lot of the stuff that he's doing, the music, he's taking some pretty standard late 20th century music from Black churches, and of course reproducing it and adding all the star power and such that he has available to him, and then watching people get interested in this and talking about, well, is Kanye really a Christian, and what really makes a Christian? So Kanye's sort of prompting these questions out there, and Muslims or Hindus, people from different parts of the world would look at North Americans and say, oh yeah, they're all Christians. And of course, North Americans recoil in horror, just like when you'd go to the Dominican Republic, and if you have pasty skin like me, someone would go to the Dominican Republic and say, you're all black. And people be like, I'm not black, I'm Indio Obscuro. And they got all these other terms for differentiating themselves from the Haitians or people, so internally they have all this differentiation, but people from the outside look and say, oh, now you're all Christians. And so I'm trying to get my mind around these things and figure out how to talk and classify and do that. So that's really what I've been thinking about, but
So you're trying to classify secular people?
I'm trying to figure out where the lines are and how we can talk about it.
Okay, so kind of like like if you would like draw the difference between two denominations, someone would be like kind of
right.
Realize I believe that and they believe that and they're kind of similar. Why do I believe it this way?
Right.
Or,
And we've had this between, say, Protestants and Catholics for a while. 50 years ago, there was a lot more antagonism between Protestants and Catholics than there is now. And I think that's a good thing. But part of it is because what we've seen since the advent of this public media, first radio, then actually first newspapers, then radio and television, and now the internet, that there's a common formation in the country between people. I mean, 70 years ago, if someone grew up Dutch Calvinist and in, say, a little town where I'm going to, Whitensville, Massachusetts, Dutch Calvinist and Roman Catholic, they'd be living next to each other, and there'd be a degree of commonality, but there'd also be significant differences because the religious demands and requirements were pretty thick then, informative of the communities. Now they're going to work in the same places. They go to church on Sunday, they go to different churches on Sunday, but their churches aren't anywhere near as different as they were before. Their beliefs aren't as different. And so this is sort of happening all over. And that has implications for my work, which is a Christian minister, because people come in and, oh, where did you go to church? Oh, I went to a Baptist church. And okay. And you've got then a disagreement about infant and adult baptism. But I'm just trying to continue to try to get my mind around what's happening in the culture. And people like Kanye are just sort of defining moments where you can say, oh, I can gain some perspective by looking at this new emergence, sort of like Jordan Peterson was.
Yeah, because I guess you get into a bit of, on the one aspect, you're kind of dissolving tribalism, but a lot of religions will go under the universal truth aspect, especially like Catholicism. This is the universal truth. We got it right, so you can't be involved in those other groups, or they don't see the full picture, kind of thing. But
well, and so again, 50, 70 years ago, people were very much baked into, boy, if you were raised Catholic, if you were raised Christian Reformed or Dutch Calvinist, you were very much baked into it. Now, people have a little fight in their CRC church, and they go to whatever church down the road sort of hits them as right. And doctrinally, it could be very, very different. And that shows, okay, how we're interacting with these propositional truths is changing. People don't see, one of the people in the little community that has joined me on the Discord server, I talked to Sam, who is a non-Trinitarian. And, he looks very evangelical, but then, at some point in time, he'll make the comment, oh, but I don't believe in the Trinity. And then suddenly pastors have to pull back and say, oh my goodness, now what do I do with him? Because, but and everything else, he looks just Christian in terms of their definitions of Christian. So it's a good time to sit back and say, okay, what are the little litmus tests and the markers that we're using, and how do those actually intersect with the historic claims of the church? And that's especially true of, say, Roman Catholics. And now that process, of course, this process has been going on for a long time. So Vatican II, was an emblem of this, and putting away of the many churches, putting away of the Latin Mass and going to masses in the vernacular. What a deeply impactful decision that is. And then some, a few churches around the US then going back to Latin masses. And it's like, this is all very interesting to me and makes me say, well, what's going on?
Yeah, trying to judge the mood of the times, I guess.
Yeah. And what's going what's going on with them, and what does this mean? I think about my grandparents and the world we were living in terms of our church worlds would be unrecognizable to my grandparents before the Second World War. Things have just changed dramatically, but I don't think a lot of people, we have such a progressive ethos about it. A lot of people would say, oh, these changes are all for the better. And in the Christian Reform world, you don't have these Sabbatarian laws. You can now go swimming on Sunday, and you can go out to eat on Sunday, and you can do your grocery shopping on Sunday. My grandparents' generation recoiled in horror at this. That's just abject worldliness. And the churches have made these changes with little or no communal conversation or theological reflection. And some of those chickens are coming home to roost, and we don't like how all those chickens taste. So there's a lot going on. But we tend to just simply be distracted by technological changes, political murmurings, and then churches institutionally just trying to keep their stuff together because they're under so much stress, because they were built for larger populations that gave more sacrificially, and now they're dealing with a wealthier population for whom the church is less of a priority, and their particular individual religious priorities might not align with the institutional priorities. All of those are tremendous changes of the last 50, 70 years, and I don't see anywhere near sufficient reflection or conversation or work being done on those questions. So they're interesting to me, and they very much intersect with all the other kinds of questions that I've dealt with on my channel. So
it's like the market is flooded with religious affiliations. We're in a bubble right now. What happens when the bubble bursts, I guess?
That's right. And that's happening. Churches in North America. So churches like mine in North America, that is a declining market, and churches hold on and hold on and hold on and then just disappear. And it's kind of like an ecosystem sustaining a drought. But now there's more people than ever out there. And it's not the case that the atheists are correct and that people are just giving up on God. It's all changing. So then again, you see something like Kanye's Sunday service, and people who, it's the same thing as we saw with Jordan Peterson. When I saw Jordan Peterson, I said, people are not going to dozens of churches hundreds of churches in Toronto to hear preachers who have been developed by theological seminaries and institutions and all that. They're walking past all of those things to go and sit and listen to a psychology professor ramble about the Bible for 2+ hours, and they're paying $40 for the pleasure of it. And what's with that? And now, Kanye's Sunday service, people who there's innumerable churches they could go to, and they have no interest in it, but they would go they do want to go see Kanye, and they would get excited about his music. And it's like, okay, what's with that?
Oh, okay. So I guess, that kind of plays into what you're talking about, the trying to read the secularists, or people who identify as secular, and this is something the religious institutions have been doing since their inception, is like they read the cultural feelings, I guess, of the time, and then you have to adjust the teachings accordingly, or like translate it into something that hits home with people.
Or they don't adjust the teachings and they quietly tinker with practice until at some point a practice and a teaching come in conflict, and then there's an explosion. And what happened in the Protestant Reformation was there was so much of this built up, and the church was so vastly connected into every area of life that it was a tremendous explosion that the Protestant Reformation was. But Protestantism has sort of been just a continued series of explosions. The Roman Catholic Church sort of handles that in a different way because of their theology of institution. But but this is happening in the Roman Catholic Church with, let's say, the papacy of Francis. So change is happening quickly, and the church, the small c church, is always adapting. Christianity is the most adaptable religion that I think the world has ever seen, that can maintain its coherence. But that adaptation process is tremendously messy. And in times of rapid change like we're living, it's very messy institutionally and in church and in people's lives.
And when you say small church, you mean like the local church?
When I mean not just the Roman Catholic, I mean the Roman Catholic Church, the Orthodox Church, the Protestant churches, church in general, rather than the Roman Catholic Church or the Christian Reformed Church or the Orthodox Church of America. So small c meaning churches. And well, that's theologically problematic too, because Protestants, Luther developed this idea of the invisible church. Well, what do you mean the invisible church? Well, it's sort of the category of church that transcends Roman Catholic and Protestant. So,
I'm just my comment on my lack of knowledge and all this stuff. I mean, I find it extremely fascinating, and I'm just trying to absorb more of it. And there's just so much to learn, like philosophy and then history of the institutions, theology, and
we can learn our whole life long and just scratch the surface of it. There's no end to it. There's no end to it. So, well, we're about out of time. I I can send this to you, or if you're willing to have me share it, I'll probably post it in the next couple of weeks while I'm away on my trip. Either way, I can just send it to you and you can review it and let me know what you'd like to do. That's fine too.
Okay. Yeah, I wouldn't mind having a copy just to go over everything and have some notes available. And
Okay.
I don't have a problem with you sharing it. I don't think
Okay.
there's anything too explicit said. So
I will. What I'll actually do is I'll upload it unlisted and I'll send you the link, and that way you can look at it. And if you hear something in it, say no, I'd rather not share it. Just send me an email, and then we'll just keep it private between us. But that way you get a copy of it and you can see it. You can share it with whoever you want. So
okay, I'm sure the biggest thing is going to be my Midwest accent that I'm not totally aware of. That's just like blatantly obvious in the video. But
I don't know. Sounds kind of normal to me. I lived a long time in Michigan, so.
oh yeah, it's not too bad there. Yeah.
Well, great talking to you, Ryan.
Yeah, you as well, Paul. This has been a good experience. I hope. I'll try and keep you posted as to how this lesson plan goes, and see if I can actually integrate it into a coherent narrative that the kids can pick up on. But
well, good for you. Good luck to you with that.
Thanks.
Take care.
It easy. Bye.
Bye.